Hey guys, I am your storyteller from My Dreamies Tales. I know many of you love listening to our stories to get sleep. If you do love Reddit stories, why not hit that like, subscribe, maybe that notification bell too? Where are you listening from, and what time is it where you are? Drop your answers in the comments. I love hearing about the amazing places our stories travel to and the cozy moments they create. Now settle in, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's journey into dreamland. Entitled as AITA for refusing to break the absurd prenup my in-laws made me sign. I always thought stories about controlling in-laws were exaggerations, something you'd see in TV series or online forums for a bit of entertainment. Then I met Julia's parents and understood that no, there are people who live to make your life difficult. But let's start from the beginning. I met Julia 6 years ago at a networking event. I had just launched my small business, more out of passion than any expectation of success, and she was working in marketing. We clicked right away. She was intelligent, funny, and beautiful, all in one perfect package. Our relationship progressed quickly, and after 2 years together, I decided to propose. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until the dinner where we announced our engagement to her parents. They had always treated me with a superficial kindness, the kind of courtesy that feels closer to obligation than genuine affection. But that night was different. Their faces went from surprise to a barely disguised discomfort. That's when the comments began. "Are you sure you want to get married so young, Julia? Marriage is a big commitment. Have you considered all the implications?" What they were really saying, though they didn't say it outright that night, was that I wasn't good enough for their daughter. They came from an upper-class family, and I, well, not so much. My parents were humble workers, and my business was barely taking off at that point. But I thought that with time, I would earn a place in their hearts. Shortly after, Julia called me crying, telling me her parents had said they didn't approve of our wedding, at least not without a prenuptial agreement. According to them, it was to protect her because you never know what can happen in the future. I'll be honest, at first, it hurt a lot. I felt like they were questioning my love for their daughter, as if all I wanted was her money, which was absurd because Julia didn't have a large estate of her own. She lived in an apartment her parents paid for. But after thinking about it and talking with Julia, I agreed to sign it. What could I do to prove to them I was with her for the right reasons, not for personal gain? The agreement was ridiculous, frankly. It stipulated that everything Julia owned before and after the marriage would be exclusively hers, and that I wouldn't have the right to claim anything in the event of a divorce. On my side, everything I owned before or earned after would also be mine. But since I was just starting out at that time, they saw it as a fair deal. I don't know if it was pride, love, or naivete, but I signed without hesitation. Julia was grateful and told me this would only prove to her parents that I was the right man for her. During the first few years of our marriage, things were good. Julia decided to leave her job and focus on the home because, according to her, she wanted to enjoy married life without stress. I didn't mind. My business was starting to grow, and I saw no problem in carrying the expenses. I like to think we were a team. What nobody saw coming, not even me, was the explosive success of my business. I started selling products online from my apartment, but in a couple of years, it became a nationally recognized company. I opened offices, hired staff, and by the time we reached our 5th anniversary, I was earning more money than I had ever imagined. On the other hand, Julia was still not working. It didn't bother me because she was my wife, and it was never about who contributes more. But what started to bother me was how her parents, who had never shown any interest in my business before, suddenly began to interfere. Suddenly, their visits to our house became constant. Although at first they seemed casual, their comments soon became uncomfortable. With the success you're having, you should think about securing Julia's future, don't you think? Don't you think it would be fair for her to have access to all this too? After all, she's your wife. Inside, I wanted to yell at them that I was already securing Julia's future. Everything I had was destined for her, without the need for papers or agreements. But no, for them, that wasn't enough. The irony of all this is that thanks to the prenuptial agreement they themselves insisted I sign, Julia had no rights to what I had earned after we got married. That detail didn't seem to bother them when they thought I would be a failure. But now that the picture was different, things started to change. Update 1. When I signed the prenuptial agreement, I thought it would be the end of any financial discussions with Julia's parents. I never imagined that years later, that same document would become the center of so much tension. To give you some context, after my business took off, our lives changed drastically. We went from living in a small rented apartment to buying a beautiful house in an exclusive area with a pool, a gym, and even a studio so Julia could have her own personal space. I didn't mind spending on amenities because I felt that everything I earned was also for her. At first, her parents seemed delighted. Suddenly, I was no longer the humble boy who didn't deserve their daughter. Now, I was the successful husband, proudly showing them the house and the new cars every time they came to visit. But as expected, that attitude only lasted until they started questioning certain things. It all began at a family dinner at our house. We had prepared a special meal to celebrate Julia's birthday, and at one point in the evening, her mother made a seemingly harmless comment. "It's amazing everything you've achieved together. I'm sure Julia has a lot to do with your success." I didn't freeze, not because I didn't want to acknowledge Julia. I've always believed that my success is also hers, but because the question had an insinuating tone, as if she wanted to say something else. I answered as diplomatically as possible. "Well, she has always supported me emotionally, and that means a lot." I thought that would be enough, but it wasn't. Her mother continued. Of course. But I mean, if it weren't for the stability she gave you, do you think you would have come this far?" That comment made me deeply uncomfortable because, although Julia had been a great emotional support at the beginning, she hadn't been involved in my business or our finances for years. I was the one working 12 hours a day, making important decisions and taking all the risks. But I didn't want to be rude, so I just nodded and changed the subject. From that dinner on, I noticed a change. Her parents' visits to our house became more frequent, and the passive-aggressive comments started pouring in. It's good that Julia found someone with a vision for the future that ensures she'll never have to worry. I wish more men understood that money isn't just theirs, but the family's. The worst came a few weeks later when Julia told me her mother wanted to talk to me privately. I was surprised, but I agreed. What followed was the most absurd conversation I've ever had. Her mother started with a sweet tone, almost as if she were worried about me. "We know you're a hardworking and successful man, and we're very proud of everything you've achieved. But we're also worried that Julia isn't protected." The word protected sounded strange to me, so I asked her to clarify. Her answer left me speechless. "Well, with the prenuptial agreement, she technically doesn't have access to what you've earned. And although I'm sure nothing will ever happen between you two, it would be good if you reconsidered the clauses so that everything is more balanced." There, I understood everything. They weren't worried about Julia. They were worried about the money. The same agreement they had forced me to sign was now the problem because it meant I had absolute control of our finances. I answered calmly, although inside I was furious. "I understand what you're saying, but that agreement was your idea, wasn't it? And I think Julia and I are fine this way. I don't see the need to change it." Her smile disappeared immediately, and her tone went from kind to condescending. "It's not about you, dear. It's about Julia. She has sacrificed a lot for this marriage. It's only fair." Sacrificed. That word haunted me for days. What exactly had Julia sacrificed? She had chosen not to work. She had chosen to depend on me financially, something I never held against her. But now, according to her parents, she deserved something more because she was my wife. When I told Julia what her mother had said, I hoped she would be on my side. Initially, she was. She assured me she didn't want to change the agreement and that her parents were just being protective. But over time, I noticed something. Every time her parents visited or spoke to her on the phone, she seemed more distant, colder towards me. One night, after she returned from visiting her mother, she casually asked me, "Do you think my mom is right? I mean, wouldn't it be easier if we didn't have that agreement?" Update 2. I don't know if you've ever felt like you're losing control of your own life, as if someone else is pulling the strings behind everything. That's exactly how I felt during the months that followed that first conversation with my mother in law. Julia started mentioning the prenup more often, always casually, as if she were testing the waters. At first, I tried not to give it too much importance. I told myself it was just a passing issue, something that would disappear if I ignored it. But it didn't. One night, after dinner, Julia sat down with me in the living room and told me she wanted to have a serious conversation. That phrase gave me a bad feeling instantly. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about regarding the prenup, she began. I already knew where this was going, but I let her continue. I think things were different when we signed it. You didn't have the success you have now, and I didn't know how much our life was going to change. But now I feel that agreement doesn't represent who we are as a couple. Don't you think? I'm not going to lie. Those words hurt me. What exactly did that mean? That our relationship was defined by a piece of paper? I tried to stay calm and asked her directly, "What do you want to change, Julia?" She hesitated a little, but finally said it. "I just want it to be fairer, something that reflects that we're a team, because we are, right?" At that moment, I couldn't contain myself. Everything I had been repressing came out all at once. A team. Since when do you care about being a team, Julia? I was the one who worked day and night to get here. You decided to leave your job because you wanted to enjoy married life. I never reproached you for it, but now it turns out that all this time I was the one making sacrifices, not you. She remained silent, as if she didn't expect me to react like that. Then she said something that completely broke me. "Does that mean you don't value what I've done for you?" I wanted to yell at her that no, I didn't value the constant pressure from her parents, the passive aggressive comments, and the fact that she never tried to defend me from them. But instead, I just told her I wasn't going to change the agreement. Of course, this didn't end there. Less than a week later, Julia organized a family meeting at home with her parents. I found out they were coming a few hours earlier when Julia casually told me she wanted us to all talk together about our future. The meeting was a disaster from the start. Her mother wasted no time and threw the first punch. "I don't understand why you're refusing to do something so simple, dear. Julia just wants what's best for both of you." I tried to keep my composure, but her condescending tone was driving me crazy. I explained to them once again that I didn't see the need to change the prenup because our lives didn't depend on it. Julia already had access to everything she needed, and I would always make sure. Her father intervened with that authoritarian air I had always hated. A man who doesn't protect his family is not a man. This isn't just about money, it's about principles. Or do you have something to hide? That last sentence was the straw that broke the camel's back. I got up from the table and told them I wasn't going to tolerate any more accusations. I reminded them that they themselves had insisted on that agreement, and now, for pure convenience, they wanted it to disappear. "If you think I'm going to give in to your manipulations, you're wasting your time," I said. Julia looked at me with a mixture of anger and sadness. At that moment, I knew she was with them, that we were no longer on the same side. After that night, things at home became tense. Julia stopped talking to me for days, and when she did, it was only to argue. The relationship we had built for years seemed to be falling apart before my eyes. One day, I came home from work and found a note on the dining room table. Julia had gone to her parents' house to think things over. I wasn't surprised. In fact, part of me felt relieved. But I also knew that this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Update 3. After Julia left for her parents' house, there was an uncomfortable silence in my life. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed, angry, or simply resigned. Deep down, I hoped this time to think was her way of calming down and seeing things clearly. But no. I soon discovered that the time she needed was actually to plan her next move with her parents. A week after she left, Julia called me to ask that we meet at a neutral cafe. Her tone was cold, almost professional, and I already knew this conversation wouldn't be good. Still, I went, because part of me wanted to fix things, even though I wasn't sure anything could be saved. When I arrived, Julia was already there, waiting for me with a folder on the table. It didn't take me long to figure out what it was about. She didn't waste time beating around the bush. I've been thinking a lot about us, and I think it's best if we resolve this once and for all. Here are the modifications to the prenuptial agreement that I think would be fair for both of us. She passed me the folder, and upon opening it, I could hardly believe what I was reading. Basically, the document stated that the original agreement would be voided and that all properties, income, and assets acquired during the marriage would be shared 50-50. In short, she wanted half of everything I had built. I tried to remain calm as I asked her, "Is this what you want? Is this your idea or your parents'?" Julia seemed offended by the question. "This is what I think is fair. They have nothing to do with this. I'm thinking about us, about our future." It was obvious she was lying. I could hear her mother's voice in every one of those words. I returned the folder and told her I wasn't going to sign anything. "If this is the future you want, then there's nothing more to talk about. You can stick with the original agreement or leave it as is." The conversation ended with Julia storming out of the cafe. But this was just the beginning. A few days later, I started receiving emails and messages from unknown numbers. Someone was spreading rumors about me, saying that I was manipulating Julia and that my success was thanks to her sacrifices. It was evident that they came from her inner circle, probably instigated by her parents. The most annoying thing was that they were trying to damage my professional reputation by sending these messages to some of my clients and employees. The lowest blow came when a former colleague sent me a screenshot of a social media post written by Julia's mother. It said something like, "It's sad to see how some people forget who was by their side when they had nothing. My daughter deserves much more respect and recognition for everything she's done for her husband. Family should always come first, but it seems some men only think of themselves." Although she didn't mention my name directly, it was clear she was talking about me. The post went viral in her social circle, and soon, more uncomfortable questions and comments started coming in from acquaintances and friends. That's when I decided to hire a lawyer. I didn't want to get to this point, but it was clear I couldn't stand idly by while they tried to destroy me. I explained the situation, and he gave me simple but firm advice. Don't give an inch. If they want to play dirty, we'll play smarter. The first thing we did was reinforce the validity of the prenuptial agreement. Fortunately, it was impeccable from a legal standpoint, and there was no way to nullify it without my consent. We also started gathering evidence of the defamation attempts by her family, which could become a legal case if they continued. Meanwhile, Julia kept sending me mixed messages. One day she would tell me she loved me and wanted to fix things, and the next she would accuse me of being selfish for not giving in a little. It was as if she were trapped between her own desires and the pressures of her parents. Finally, a few months ago, I received a formal letter from a lawyer hired by Julia. In it, they requested a meeting to renegotiate the terms of the agreement and threatened to take the case to court if I didn't agree. This was ridiculous because the agreement was absolutely solid. What angered me most was that in the letter, they insinuated that Julia had contributed significantly to the success of my business, something we both knew wasn't true. At that point, I stopped trying to understand or negotiate. I decided that if they wanted a war, they would have one. My lawyer and I began preparing a strategy, not only to defend myself, but also to expose all the lies and manipulations of her family. Update 4. When I received the letter from Julia's lawyers, I assumed it would be their most aggressive move. But no, it was just the beginning of their attack. Julia and her parents were determined to break me. After ignoring my initial refusal, her parents took a step that frankly seemed designed to intimidate me. They filed a lawsuit against me, alleging that Julia was entitled to fair compensation for the significant impact she had had on my business and our finances. This was a surprise because the prenuptial agreement had already been validated, and there was no way to break it without my consent. However, I quickly understood their tactic. They weren't looking to win the case, but to wear me down emotionally and financially through endless legal proceedings. Their plan was simple. They would suffocate me until I had no choice but to give in. My lawyer reassured me, telling me that their accusations were absurd and that they had no evidence to support their case, but I was already tired. My patience had reached its limit, and I was determined to hit back. It was during the preparation of my defense that something interesting came to light. My lawyer and his team started investigating the financial situation of Julia and her parents to counter their accusations, and they discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Julia's parents were in serious financial trouble. Their family business, which had once been their pride, was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had debts with banks and suppliers, and apparently, they had been using the image of their perfect family to keep up appearances. This explained a lot. Her mother's constant comments about protecting Julia and their desperate attempts to access my money weren't out of love or concern, but because they were financially sinking. This wasn't all. Among the financial documents my lawyer reviewed, we found something even juicier. The in laws had tried to transfer properties into Julia's name a few months before she asked me to review the prenup. Basically, they were setting the stage to use her as an intermediary and protect their assets from possible seizures. At that moment, everything clicked. Julia wasn't the mastermind behind this situation. Her parents were using her to save themselves. I felt betrayed again, but this time with a mixture of pity for Julia. However, that didn't mean I was going to forgive any of this. With this new information in hand, my lawyer proposed a plan. Countersue for defamation and emotional damages using the evidence of the posts and rumors they had spread about me. Publicly expose her parents' financial situation if necessary to delegitimize their accusations that I was the selfish manipulator in the relationship. Use the evidence of the attempted property transfers to demonstrate that this was all a financial game by her family. While all this was being prepared, Julia tried to approach me again. One day, she showed up at the house unannounced. She was crying, saying she didn't want to get to this point and that she just wanted us to go back to the way things were. Part of me wanted to believe her, but her previous attitude and the influence of her parents didn't allow me to trust her. I answered frankly, Julia, I don't know if this is really how you feel or if it's another one of your parents' strategies, but I can't keep living like this. If you really want to fix things, you need to distance yourself from them and show me that you're on my side. Otherwise, this ends here. She didn't say anything. She just left crying. I didn't know if her tears were genuine or part of the show, but it didn't matter anymore. I was determined to protect myself at all costs. Shortly after, her parents tried one last desperate move. They sent a proposal for a friendly agreement to avoid going to trial. Basically, they wanted me to give them a considerable sum of money in exchange for withdrawing the lawsuit. It was ridiculous if they thought I was going to give in after everything they had done. They couldn't be more wrong. I responded through my lawyer that not only did I reject their proposal, but I was proceeding with my countersuit. Their silence after that was deafening. Now, with the hearing approaching, everything was about to explode, and I was ready to face whatever came. Final update. Well, here we are. The storm has finally passed, and the mess Julia and her parents left behind was much bigger than I imagined. But you know what? For the first time in a long time, I feel free. Although the road to get here was anything but easy, the hearing was exactly the circus I expected. Julia's parents arrived with an air of superiority, as if they were sure their strategy was going to work. Julia, on the other hand, looked completely out of place, almost as if she didn't want to be there. I guess even she realized they had crossed a line from which they couldn't return. My lawyer did an impeccable job. During the first part of the hearing, he dismantled each of the accusations against me, pointing out how the evidence they presented was vague and unfounded. But the real gem came when we presented our countersuit. First, we exposed the social media posts and the messages I had received, pointing out how they had tried to defame me, to pressure me emotionally and socially. Then we brought to light the financial problems of Julia's parents, including the attempts to transfer properties to her name. The judge was not impressed. In fact, he looked visibly annoyed with them. But the final blow was when we presented an email that Julia had sent to her mother months before, asking me to renegotiate the prenup. In it, Julia said something like, "I'm not sure this is the right thing to do. I know he has never lacked anything from me, but I understand that we have to protect ourselves. I will do what you ask, but I feel horrible about this." That email was devastating for them. It showed not only that everything was their parents' plan, but also that Julia wasn't acting independently. They tried to argue that the email was out of context, but it was too late. In the end, the judge completely dismissed their lawsuit and ruled in my favor on the countersuit. They not only had to cover all legal costs, but were also ordered to pay compensation for defamation. It was a resounding victory. After the trial, things fell apart quickly for them. The public exposure of their financial problems was a low from which they couldn't recover. Their company ended up closing, and their properties were seized to pay their debts. Ironically, the same family that once looked down on me for not being good enough was now ruined, while I continued to thrive. Julia tried to contact me after the trial. She sent me a long message apologizing and saying that she had been manipulated by her parents. She said she still loved me and wanted to try again, but I didn't respond. For me, it was over. I sold the house we lived in together and moved to another city, far from everything that reminded me of that stage of my life. I blocked Julia and her family everywhere. I didn't want to give them another ounce of my energy. The best part? I used some of the compensation money I received to donate to a local charity that supports young entrepreneurs. If I learned anything from this experience, it's that in the end, it's not just about winning, but about making sure your victory means something bigger. It may not have been the most dramatic revenge, but seeing their perfect world crumble while I moved on with my life was more than enough for me. And that's it. After everything that happened, I'm okay. I'm better, in fact. Now I know that my worth doesn't depend on what others think of me, and I will never allow anyone, no matter how close they are, to try to take away what I've built. A piece of advice for those who read this: protect what's yours. No matter how much you love someone, make sure your boundaries are clear and immovable. If someone truly loves you, they won't try to cross them. Thank you so much, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care, and much love.